says he will keep moving forward and deliver on the priorities of the people.
When some of these officials and advisers were leaving their jobs, I briefly attended gatherings to thank them for everything they had done, because I believe that recognising achievement and preserving morale are essential duties of leadership. The police did not find my attendance at these occasions to be a breach of the rules, but they found otherwise in respect of some of those gatherings after I had left or when I was not in the building.
Well, a snap poll by YouGov has found 59% of Brits surveyed think the Prime Minister should resign. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer told the Commons that the Sue Gray report laid bare the rot in Number 10. He called on MPs to tell Boris Johnson it's time to pack his bags.
It is that failure of leadership that has now left his government paralysed in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The government has turned the focus of his government to saving his own skin. It's utterly shameful.
Well, the Chancellor is expected to unveil a multi-billion-pound plan to help struggling families through the cost of living crisis. That's tomorrow. A new windfall tax on energy firms could be used to fund the package after Ofgem warned the energy price cap could rise by a further £830 in October. To other news now, a woman in Cumbria has been jailed for the murder of a one-year-old boy she was hoping to adopt. Laura Castle reported that Leyland James Corkhill was hurt after falling off a sofa, but hospital medics raised concerns about her claims. He died the following day from catastrophic head injuries. The 38-year-old will serve a minimum term of 18 years. A retired doctor who sexually assaulted his patients for over 3 decades has been jailed for 12 years. Krishna Singh was convicted of abusing 47 women from 1984 to 2018. The 72-year-old's victims include pregnant women, a rape survivor and 4 girls under the age of 16. He's also been placed on the sex offenders register. The Foreign Secretary says the government wants to remove the customs bureaucracy from the Northern Ireland Protocol rather than scrap it completely. Speaking in Belfast, Liz Truss said the UK is open to talking with the European Union, but warned the issue can't be delayed any longer. She added that the UK has practical solutions to ease frictions to protect the single market and the Good Friday Agreement.
I think everybody in Northern Ireland recognises there are issues with the protocol that needs to be addressed. And my preference, as I've said, is to get a negotiated solution with the EU, but we simply can't allow this situation to drift.
In the US, at least 19 children and 2 teachers have been killed in a single classroom by a teenage gunman in Texas. Officials say they've not yet confirmed how many have been injured, but multiple children did survive. The 18-year-old suspect, named as Salvador Ramos, opened fire at a primary school in Uvalde and was shot dead by an officer at the scene. His motive is not yet known. President Joe Biden says Congress must pass new gun laws. Travellers can expect major travel disruption after the RMT union voted in favour of what it's calling the biggest rail strike in modern history. The RMT has told GBNews the action won't take place over the Platinum Jubilee weekend. The union's Senior Assistant General Secretary, Eddie Dempsey, says rail firms have made millions during the pandemic and his members need a pay rise.
Our members, some of them are now in the 3rd year of a pay freeze. Inflation, RPI is at 11.1% now, and this is the biggest cost of living crisis people are saying since records began, and they're feeling the pinch. They regard themselves as having worked extremely hard during the pandemic in difficult circumstances to keep the country moving, and they feel now that they're being betrayed.
Kate Moss says Johnny Depp never pushed her, kicked her or threw her down any stairs. She's testified at Johnny Depp's defamation trial against his ex-wife, Amber Heard, in the US. The model, who was in a relationship with the actor in the 90s, appeared via video link at the Fairfax courthouse in Virginia to speak about a holiday they'd taken together. Closing arguments are scheduled for Friday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, let's get to Colin.
Back to Brazier. Well, here I am for the first time. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6. And in the next hour, we've just heard from the Prime Minister, who's addressed the nation following the release of the official version of social events inside Downing Street whilst the country was under coronavirus restrictions. The civil servant Sue Gray published her report. You'll know this by now. She says many of the events, quote, should not have been allowed to happen. Well, while we're on air, Boris Johnson will now meet the 1922 committee of backbench MPs. His MPs, will he face their cheers or their jeers? Also, the gun attack at a primary school in Texas, killing 19 children and 2 young adults. American author and political podcast host Andrew Klavan will give his reaction. And with me for the next 2 hours, spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK, Sarah Elliott. So then, in the next hour, the Prime Minister will go before his own MPs and see for himself whether Sue Gray's report on parties during lockdown has stirred his parliamentary party to rebellion. The report, which included new photographs of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, suggests some of the gatherings in question represented a failure to observe not just the high standards expected of those working at the heart of government, but also of the standards expected of the entire British population at the time. Sue Gray went on to say senior leadership figures at Downing Street, quote, must bear responsibility for this culture. She didn't pin the blame on named individuals. Boris Johnson says he takes full responsibility for everything that happened on his watch. Let's get some instant reaction, or nearly instant reaction. Columnist at the Daily Telegraph, Tim Stanley. Tim, welcome to you. What do you make of today's circus?
A couple of things have changed. One is that we have photographic evidence of the parties, although it's hardly the last days of Rome. Nonetheless, we do. Whenever you have an image of something, it concentrates the mind. Another thing that's changed is that it's obvious that officials did realise that these were parties, that they were breaking the rules, and that they were, to paraphrase one official, getting away with it. So I do think that does slightly change the conversation. But in terms of the overall narrative, no, nothing really has changed. And I suspect the Prime Minister will continue in office.
And Tim, you mentioned the photographs. Let's start with the photographs then. How does the publication of these photographs advance our knowledge of what happened inside Downing Street? How damning or not are they?
Well, look, that's a somewhat subjective thing as to whether or not you really think that a Prime Minister pausing at what is clearly a work event like this to raise a glass of beer, whether or not you think that's either breaking the rules or indeed just generally something unbecoming of a Prime Minister. I don't know. But what we do see, what we appear to see, is people breaking social distancing. We see something that's clearly organised. This is not a spontaneous thing where people are just stopping by a desk where they happen to have a bit of drink. This actually looks like, yes, I think I would call that a party.
But Tim, I just wonder whether you heard, I mean, he said it in the House, but he certainly repeated it several times in the press conference at Downing Street that he just gave. This idea that actually when you're in a position of leadership, part of the role of leadership is to make sure that when staff are moving on, you bid them farewell.
I would entirely agree with that. The counter-argument, of course, is that these were extraordinary circumstances under which the rules forbid that. And moreover, the Prime Minister did indeed say that he did not attend a party. And officials said that they didn't think these things were parties. And the photographs alone seem to contradict that. So it's the specific context under which all this has taken place. I do think there is an air of extraordinary puritanism in the reporting of this. I mean, I saw a BBC interview with an official whose voice was dubbed over in the style of an IRA informant, who said things like drink was consumed, and some people were drinking a great deal. And sort of the BBC interviewer sort of almost took a breath. There was alcohol. I mean, it does feel like we've gone back to the 19th century. But then, it's the context of COVID. And how you respond to this hinges upon whether you think the rules were fair or indeed the pandemic was that serious.
Well, do you know what? I was really struck. I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? But in that press conference we just had, the only journalist who raised the question of whether the rules themselves were at fault was Tom Harwood. GBNews' Tom Harwood. And the Prime Minister said, I don't think the flaw was with the rules. The boundaries between work and socialising were hard to draw. I mean, we see that, don't we? We've seen that in our own lives. We found the boundaries between work and play in lockdown hard to draw. On one level, it's a statement of the obvious. But to your point, that actually, in all the questions that came out today, that was the only time it came up. It seems a fundamental one.
Well, that's a nice bit of name dropping there. Well done. But it was. But good for him for asking that. I don't dispute that. I mean, it comes down to this: there was clearly something off about the rules. That the government either had no intention of obeying them, which implies it didn't think the pandemic was that serious, or it couldn't obey them, which implies the rules were that Byzantine that it was impossible to stick to them. This is the institution that was running the country. And arguably, it operated by different rules. It had to. And of course, it was also not operating in a clinical setting. I think morally, there's a distinction between trying to obey rules in a clinical setting, so can I visit someone in hospital, and trying to obey rules in that kind of work setting, where you probably aren't a direct risk to anyone, and those people there probably aren't a risk to anyone else either. But nonetheless, it says something about the rules that the very people setting them either couldn't uphold them or didn't intend to. It suggests to me that there was something wrong about the rules. And I don't understand why we're not having a conversation about that. Well, actually, I do. I think it's psychological. The nation doesn't want to yet confront the possibility that the pandemic was not as catastrophic as it was made out to be at the time, and the rules not as justified, and we perhaps didn't have to stick to them the way we did.
Some fresh thinking there from Tim Stanley of the Daily Telegraph. Tim, thanks as ever. Appreciate your time. Sarah Elliott is spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK, a regular contributor here, joins me here in the studio. Sarah, I know we're going to talk about events in Texas today, important events that raise questions about American gun laws and to what extent we in the UK can even are in a position to talk about it. We don't get a vote in those things, do we? But to political matters in this country, what did you make as an semi-outsider of what we've seen today?
Well, I think that the report exonerates Boris in many ways. The responsibility has fallen on the senior aides who were quoted as, oh, this doesn't look good for comms, or we got away with it and he didn't know about it and was escorted in. So, you know, even I think the photos, they don't look too incriminating. They do look like a work event. You know, he's standing, he's not sitting, he's not lounging kind of thing. But I think the general culture of debauchery that's in number 10, the wine time Fridays, the parties till 4:20 a.m., those kind of things, that's actually what I think is worse for him, because he sets the tone and culture of number 10.
Can I just make a point that's probably not been made today? You mentioned those messages on WhatsApp, people saying this looks bad, etc., etc. I remember I was briefly in Washington. One of the stories then was about the way government officials recorded meetings, and they realised there was a way around it. So people started taking business notes on Post-it notes because they couldn't be subpoenaed. Is one effect of this going to be that actually, if you're a government official now, you go back to putting it in somebody's shell-like, you don't put it in a WhatsApp because it might be called forth as evidence?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but then our phones can record things too, can't they? So how are we going to pass secret messages now? We all thought WhatsApp was encrypted. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but I think the general culture of debauchery, which if you're in Westminster, you're very familiar with it, but the rest of the country will just be sickened by it. But I think you tweeted it, it's not the top story of the day today.
No, we'll talk about that in a while. Fantastic piece in The Spectator talking about today being a helicopter event. In other words, the news channels put up their helicopters because they think it's important, but in a way not necessarily the entire country thinks it is. Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. Let's turn to Sir Desmond Swayne, MP, for his thoughts and reactions to events today. Sir Desmond, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. I've no idea whether you'll be attending or you're invited to attend the 1922 committee that will be presented with the Prime Minister's account of events today. What kind of reception do you think you'll get?
Well, I'm certainly going to attend, and I anticipate that there will be a measure of relief that having expected an excoriating report, it wasn't nearly as bad as I certainly believed it might be. I mean, I was certainly concerned and accept that what has happened is shameful and deeply regrettable, and the Prime Minister has made clear that he takes responsibility for that. But on the key tests of do I believe that the Prime Minister misled the House of Commons? No, I don't. Do I believe that he was legitimate in regarding these as work events, misled? Nevertheless, though he was, yes, I do. I think it was perfectly appropriate to have him to have attended a gathering at work to say a few words and then leave. Of course, the system should ensure that he is briefed on what happens after he leaves, and that's something that now needs to be addressed. But I'm confident that the Prime Minister was as shocked and appalled as most of us have become over recent months.
It's not, though, where matters rest, is it? I mean, the final question in that press conference from the Guardian journalist, what about the party in the flat? The Prime Minister's answer to that question was, I think it's fair to say, pretty ambiguous. And also, we've got a parliamentary committee that's going to be looking at this for months to come. The pain is not over.
Oh, no doubt it'll run and run and run. But as far as I'm concerned, the police have had their inquiry, and Sue Gray has given her her report. I just wonder to what extent now attention will move elsewhere. Certainly, my attention has moved elsewhere.
Sir Desmond Swayne, we appreciate your attention this afternoon. Thanks ever so much. Appreciate your time. Be nice, actually, we could talk to him after that 1922 committee, wouldn't it? But I'm sure we could have the voices from there as well. The former Labour MP, Stephen Pound, joins me here in the studio. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you so much.
What would you make of events today? You're probably less supportive than Sir Desmond Swayne, I think.
Considerably less supportive, and I think Sir Desmond was being sort of uncharacteristically oleaginous there. I mean, he used to be, sort of quite aggressive and abusive when we were in the House, certainly abrasive. Look, I think everybody's priced in the fact that we have a Prime Minister who is a sort of, the monarch of mendacity. I mean, he's a man who has, at best, a nodding acquaintance with the truth. What makes me so damned angry about this is our reputation internationally is suffering terribly. Look at the French papers today. Look at what they're saying in the rest of Europe. We are becoming a laughing stock.
I did a little walk through the newsroom earlier, and some of our screens are tuned to channels like CNN. They weren't covering this.
Well, I've seen it on the French press, particularly today, and we are becoming a laughingstock on that. But I have to say that one of the things that absolutely stuck in my throat about this, what should have been a sort of mea culpa in the House this afternoon, was when Boris Johnson spent about 5 minutes praising the staff in number 10 Downing Street, saying they're marvellous people. But this is the same person who actually oversaw a system whereby they were abusing the cleaners, the security staff, the police officers. They were being treated with absolute withering contempt. And when he's quoted as saying, I'm the effing Führer, which has not been denied by a number of, apparently he was saying that when people said you can't have a party in here. I'm sorry, you cannot on the one hand big up the staff, the people who work for Parliament, on the other hand denigrate them and abuse them and treat them like rubbish. I'm so damned angry about this because he will probably get away with it. That's what makes me so damn furious. Look at his body language. At the end of it, he said, I've had 9 questions, but I'm going to take another 3 because, frankly, you can't touch me. When David Cameron called him a greased piglet, it was probably one of the most sensible things that David Cameron said. I'm angry because we're looking fools internationally. I'm damned angry because this country is being led by someone who simply is utterly untrustworthy. And I'm furious that the nation seems to have priced that in. They say, oh, yes, we know that he's a bit of a liar, but so what? And I just really, what does this say for standards and morality? And look all around you in Parliament today. It's all different aspects of this immorality that's taking place. And I'm sorry, I know the thing about a fish rotting from the head isn't actually true, but in this particular case, I think that's a metaphor we can apply.
Sarah Elliott, your thoughts?
Well, I think the reason that he can get away with this is that there's no definite person to succeed him. I mean, the Tories don't know who the next leader would be. So there's no definite successor. I mean, I agree with a lot of the elements you express, but at the end of the day, it's caked in with Boris. People are more concerned about their cost of living crisis. This is kind of a Westminster bubble story in many ways. But I also liked what Tim Stanley said, that it's about the rules. Maybe the rules could never have been followed anyways.
Stephen, just on the point about our foreign reputation, I mean, in the eyes of many, I'll be talking to John Bolton soon, former US ambassador to the United Nations. I suspect he thinks that our international reputation, in the way we're handling Ukraine and offering leadership there, is not in the toilet, actually far from it. And you, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were an MP in the Blair years. Tony Blair took our soldiers into an illegal war in the eyes of many in Iraq. and he received what kind of censure as a consequence?
Well, there's no such thing as a legal war. I mean, you can't say illegal. If the United Nations approved something, if that's the definition of legality, then it wasn't illegal. Tony Blair took us into a war where a murderous, genocidal dictator had murdered 1 million of his own people, had actually dropped gas bombs in Halabja, had killed the Kurds, and we could either have done something or we could have done nothing. People used to come to my surgery and say, you created this country, you drew the lines in the sand, you're the people who created it, you're the people who actually were the force there, the colonial force. Are you going to do anything or are you going to do nothing? So I think that's a totally different one. I think Tony Blair, and I have to say, that night, March the 17th, 2003, March the 18th, was one of the worst nights in my parliamentary career, and I'll regret that till the day I die. I still wake up in the night thinking, why the hell did I vote for that? But at the time, I think we were all thought we were acting in the right way. You cannot say that about suitcases full of booze being lugged down from the Co-op at the Strand.
OK. Stephen, as always, appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Let's turn to the Conservative political commentator, Joanne Naylor, who's in Westminster. She's been watching the Prime Minister's press conference a little over, what was it, wound up about 22 minutes ago, didn't it? Joanne, appreciate your time. What did you make of the Prime Minister's... let's start with his demeanour at that press conference. I thought the point's been made here in the studio, he looked like somebody who felt that he'd beaten the rap.
Yeah, I mean, I think he came across as actually sort of weary and, a little bit, dare I say it, slightly bored with having to keep repeating the same lines that we've heard him repeat for some time. I'm not sure whether that's the impression he wanted to create, but I think that's a sort of byproduct of this story for having run for such a long time. And one thing that, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, he has been strategically very adept in constantly pushing this thing into the long grass. And even at this point that the Sue Gray report has, if you like, emerged from the long grass, I think the fact that it has been rolling and rolling and rolling for such a long time and didn't quite have perhaps the bite people expected means that he might feel entitled to give the impression that he's got away with it.
The day itself, James Kirkup, respected parliamentary reporter, correspondent, columnist. He says today was one of those, what he describes as helicopter days. I can't hear the clatter of rotor blades above your head, but I imagine for substantial parts of today, you probably could do standing where you are. The news channels put up the helicopters because today's a big day. And actually, there's a disconnect between what we journalists give a toss about and what the public really think matters.
Colin, I've got to admit that I've lost my earpiece, so here we are. I'm back connected with you now.
You're back in.
But I think I got the gist of what you were asking. About the disconnect between what journalists focus on and what regular people are preoccupied with. I think that observation is very accurate. But I also think, to a certain extent, it's been quite cleverly capitalised on by the Prime Minister's press machine to kind of reinforce that narrative and create the sense that actually he is preoccupied and concerned with the actual problems that people face. And whilst that is partly true, it's also a little disingenuous because we shouldn't suggest that people don't feel genuine anger about these things. So I think there's an element of truth in both elements of that equation.
For now, thanks very much indeed. We all have a problem, don't we, with the earpieces popping out. I think the solution long-term might be some sort of jack plug that goes directly straight into the back of the head. Joanne, thanks very much indeed. After the break, what impact might the full Sue Gray report into Downing Street parties have on the Met Police? They've concluded their investigation, but will the report put renewed pressure on the force to explain how they arrived at their decision to issue one fixed penalty notice against the Prime Minister? Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, will join us. First, though, it's time for the weather.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A PM says he's humbled by the findings of the Sue Gray report into Downing Street parties during lockdown. Sue Gray found that many of the events, quote, should not have been allowed to happen and that staff who raised concerns were not treated with respect. The Prime Minister has argued today that he believes the gatherings he attended had been work events. Tom Harwood was at the Prime Minister's press conference in Downing Street a few moments ago. And here he is now. He's crept outside. Hi to you, Tom. I was struck, and apologies if this comes across as a little bit sycophantic, but I genuinely was struck by the fact that amongst all the political journalists in that room, you were the only one who had the temerity to say, well, look, maybe following the rules wasn't so easy because the rules themselves, on one level, were pretty balmy.
Well, I think it's an absolutely crucial part of how we can understand how this went on within Downing Street for so long, how on those 8 dates rules could have been broken over varying levels of severity of restrictions, how the rules were changing and indeed at some points relatively difficult to distinguish between what was a legitimate gathering and an illegitimate gathering. And it's fairly plain to see the epidemiological balminess, really, of the fact that a group of people in a room all talking together for one purpose is fine, but for another is not. That makes very little epidemiological sense. And so I suppose I was trying to get to the bottom of how people could understand that, well, to be honest, if people were all in a room together, does it matter what they're doing? Clearly within the rules it did, and yet not necessarily within the epidemiology of the whole affair. And so the question then becomes, to what extent were the rules consistent? To what extent were the rules potentially not that well written? Now, the Prime Minister took the question to mean, should there have been any non-pharmaceutical interventions at all? And I don't think that that's quite what it was getting at. And so he was able to stand there at the dispatch box and say, well, we couldn't have done nothing as a government. And that's true. Yet to suggest that exactly what was done by the government at that time was absolutely necessary, to suggest that sitting on park benches was banned, to suggest that outdoor meetings were banned for so long and that first lockdown stretched in various forms for so many months. That was, I think, a legitimate question to ask, and I'm glad that the matter was raised.
As are we. Tom Harwood, thanks very much indeed. Well, a total of 126 fixed penalty notice were handed out by the Met. That's a separate investigation route compared to what Sue Gray is now doing. There have been some complaints about transparency about that process pursued by senior police officers. Mark White's our Home and Security editor here to reflect on that. I think it was Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, pretty critical. There'll be those people, I think I'm probably one of them, who's uncomfortable about politicians criticising a process which, frankly, the police probably didn't want to get involved in. But there, we have it.
You hit the nail on the head. The police absolutely did not want to get involved in what they knew was
a real political row. The last thing they wanted to do was get stuck in the middle of that. So they resisted for some time. They said that the policy that they adopted was one of not retrospectively investigating potential COVID breaches. They were bounced into it, though, Colin, by all of the political backlash that there was, and the then Commissioner Cressida Dick had to bow to that and to open up this investigation. And since then, we've had quite a number of months of 12 dedicated officers who've gone over this in great detail, and all of the photographs that have been coming out today that everyone's been getting terribly excited about, they've had for some time. They've interviewed all of the people that attended these events, sometimes multiple times, and cross-checked all of those statements. They've investigated it. They've come to their conclusion. This is what the people who are now criticising the Metropolitan Police wanted when they shouted for the Metropolitan Police to start investigating this in the first place. Well, they've done that. They've come back with a set of results that clearly is not enough to satisfy everyone, and they want them to relitigate that, to reinvestigate that. Well, it's not going to happen as far as Scotland Yard's concerned. They're finished with it, and they're glad they're finished with it.
Well, they're finished with it, Mark, but in County Durham, they're not finished with it.
They're not, no. And, you know, you've got a juxtaposed position there where I suppose you should say to people, be careful what you wish for, because if you want the rules to be applied in such a strict way as you seem to be calling for the Metropolitan Police to apply the rules regarding these events to Boris Johnson, then the same should be true of the events in County Durham. And the very people that are calling for the Metropolitan Police now to re-examine this, well, there could be people on the other side of the political divide who are saying to Durham Constabulary, if they're not happy with whatever they conclude, we want you to re-examine this. You haven't fully, as far as we're concerned, fully examined all of the facts here, and you should be applying the criteria perhaps a bit more strictly than you are.
Mark, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up after the break, another really big story today, and in many respects a far more important one, another mass shooting in America. This one was in Texas, a gunman killing 19 primary school children and 2 adults there. We'll be talking to Sarah Elliott about that and a number of other voices who've got something important to say on that story. First, we've got the latest news headlines with Townsend.
Colin, thank you. It's 4:34. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he feels overwhelmingly that he should remain in office, no matter how bitter and painful the conclusions of the Sue Gray report. The 37-page document, which contains photographs, highlights a number of events where many people gathered and alcohol was consumed excessively. It concludes that senior leadership must bear responsibility for this culture. Boris Johnson says he will keep moving forward and deliver on the priorities of the people.
When some of these officials and advisers were leaving their jobs, I briefly attended gatherings to thank them for everything they had done, because I believe that recognising achievement and preserving morale are essential duties of leadership. The police did not find my attendance at these occasions to be a breach of the rules, but they found otherwise in respect of some of those gatherings after I had left or when I was not in the building.
A snap poll by YouGov has found that 59% of Brits surveyed think the Prime Minister should resign. Well, in the US, the 19 children and 2 teachers killed by a teenage gunman in Texas were all shot in a single 4th-grade classroom. The 18-year-old suspect, named as Salvador Ramos, allegedly shot his grandmother at home before heading to the elementary school. He was shot dead by an officer at the scene. Travellers can expect major disruption after the RMT union voted in favour of what it's calling the biggest rail strike in modern history. The RMT has told GB News the strike won't take place over the Platinum Jubilee weekend. Supermodel Kate Moss has told a court in America that Johnny Depp never pushed, kicked or threw her downstairs. She's testified at the actor's defamation trial against his ex-wife Amber Heard. The model, who was in a relationship with Depp in the 90s, appeared via video link at the Fairfax court in Virginia to speak about a holiday they'd taken together. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. It's back to Colin in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, not all of you like it, but we are continuing with our coverage and reaction to the Sue Gray report into Downing Street parties during lockdown. The Prime Minister says he's humbled and has learned a lesson following the publication of this 37-page long document, which contains photographs, amongst other things, highlighting a number of events where alcohol was consumed excessively until the early hours of the morning, the after effects seen on the carpet and on the walls. The Prime Minister will shortly face his own MPs as he addresses the 1922 Backbench Committee. I strongly suspect, you may too, that we will get some sense of what's happened in that meeting. Jeers or cheers for the Prime Minister, in a sense, in terms of the brute politics of this. That is the reaction that matters. The only people who can remove the Prime Minister before the next general election are his backbenchers. If they are remaining supportive of him in the next hour or so, then in a sense, at one level, that's all that matters. Though, of course, to many other people, there's a lot more at stake. I suspect one of those people is the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. Sir Ed, welcome to you. I'm guessing you would agree with that idea that, yes, his backbenchers may be supportive, but clearly elsewhere in the chamber, but in the public at large, there's a lot of people with a lot of misgivings about this Prime Minister.
I think you're right. One thing I would say is I thought the response from the Conservative backbenchers was quite muted. Lots of Tory MPs left quite quickly during the statement. It's almost as they were embarrassed at the way the Prime Minister was defending himself. He said he was sorry, but I think everyone knows he's just sorry he got caught. This is a Prime Minister who broke the law, who presided over Number 10, who wasn't just partying when it was illegal. They were partying in a disgusting way. They were treating security staff and cleaning staff in a quite outrageous way, but a bit like a Bullingdon Boy club member from Oxford, i.e. the Prime Minister. And you know what? I think those embarrassed Conservative MPs, they might still take action. I hope they do. I think it's their patriotic duty to get rid of this Prime Minister. He's not fit to lead our wonderful country. And let's see if they do. Certainly Liberal Democrats will continue our call that he should go, not least because we need someone with the trust of the British people to help us through this economic crisis that's hitting millions of pensioners and families.
David, just on that, I'm looking at some of the emails that are coming in. Let me put a couple to you. I'll start with this one from Anne. No surname, I apologise. But Anne says, that photo, we've been flashing it up for pretty much all day, that photo with all the sandwiches looks to me like a socially distanced work lunch. How, asks Anne, is that a party? So, Ed, what say you? How is it a party?
Well, I'll tell you what, I went to school in my constituency with a number of teenagers, and this was during this whole long-running saga, and they said to me, did I think it was a party or a work event? And I said to them, I'd like to know your opinion. And these teenagers, they said to me, well, it was clearly a party, wasn't it, sir? Do you know what? I think the majority, probably the vast majority of the British people, they could see it was a party. The Prime Minister, is trying to pretend that he didn't know it was a party, that he thought it was a work event. I don't think anyone believes him. I think this is a Prime Minister who lies on an industrial scale. And people I've talked to on the doorstep during the run-up to the local elections just recently, they kept saying they don't trust him anymore. And, people need to reflect on that.
OK,
and millions of people don't trust the Prime Minister.
And maybe those MPs, and maybe those MPs at the 1922 committee will be reflecting on it too. Just one other email while we have time. Linda, again, apologies, no surname. Linda says, my son lives in Germany, and they're laughing at how we're spending so much time on this. They can't believe that the events are being called parties. Do we run the risk sometimes? I mean, I think a lot of people, I'm probably one of them, that likes the fact we are so punctilious. But I guess from the outside looking in, it can look almost petty.
Well, if you talk to the families of people who've lost loved ones, the bereaved families, you'll hear a different story. They weren't allowed, because the Prime Minister told them, they weren't allowed to be with their loved ones as they died. And I'm afraid I think it's incumbent on every MP to listen to those bereaved families. And I hear what Linda says, and I respect Linda, but I have to say I respect those bereaved families, I respect the NHS staff, the care staff who put their lives on the line for us in a most serious situation. They obeyed the law. Nurses across our country, doctors, carers, they didn't have work parties. They knew what was at stake. And so I have to say, on behalf of those bereaved families, on behalf of those NHS workers, on behalf of those care workers, who I salute again today, the Prime Minister should go. He broke the law. We shouldn't have a Prime Minister of our great country, a lawbreaker. And the fact he doesn't realise that makes him one of the most indecent Prime Minister this country has ever had.
So Ed Davey is the leader of the Liberal Democrats. Ed, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Sarah Elliott's my studio guest today. I could see you grimacing. Tell me why.
Well, I mean, yes, I do think he's right about the rules, and there were bereaved families, and all of our major life events were frozen while they were, partying in Number 10. So I can understand from that perspective. But on the other hand, this is Number 10 Downing Street. It is the heart of government. It's a very intense work environment. I don't think that those photos show exactly a raving party going on. I think it does look like a work event. There's a screen up. It's those cheap sandwiches you buy at the local co-op, £3 deal
I'm glad you mentioned the co-op, because I'm going to mention the co-op as well. My sister, during the early days of lockdown, was working with no protective equipment, serving people at a co-op outlet in Bradford in West Yorkshire. And I hear Sir Ed Davey there lauding again the efforts of our NHS staff, but not mentioning other people, the tanker drivers, the people who worked in the checkouts. And I'm going to mention that if he won't.
Yeah.
I'm also going to mention the fact, I remember when I was at Sky, and it was very difficult to get this data across. But if you looked, it was a hideous calculation, but if you looked at the number of fatalities within the NHS, they were broadly in proportion with the rest of the population. But of course they did fantastic work. Loads of people did. It was a terrible time for the country.
Yes, again, it's the worshipping of the NHS and the sacred cow. And I think of all those delivery drivers that went around, that had no choice and went to work and kept us snug in our homes. And I also think, although the NHS does great work, I've had my children with them, but, they were doing viral videos dancing in the hallways of the hospitals as well. So not like they had their...
I wouldn't keep banging on about the line, there were never any parties amongst 1.3 million employees.
Exactly.
It's hard to sustain that
I think the rules were hard to sustain.
Well, we're going to move on. Sarah, for now, thanks very much. Now, when parents send their child off to school, they do so safe in the knowledge that the school will act in loco parentis, will protect and care for that child as a parent would and should. But in America, that contract does seem to have broken down to some degree again this week. Parents packed off their children to school only to hear reports of gunshots in the classroom. Imagine the pain of the phone call telling someone that their son or daughter was amongst the dead. 19 kids shot dead in Robb Elementary School in Texas, the latest setting for a crime which we describe as one of unimaginable evil, were it not for the fact that it's all too imaginable because it's happened in the US so many times before. Well, Joe Biden told Americans it was time to stand up to his country's gun lobby and turn pain into action. And anyone listening to phone-in programmes on British radio stations today would have heard many voices raised in agreement. But while it makes sense to express our entirely justifiable disgust at events 5,000 miles away, it's strange when you hear some people shouting at a radio host as if we in Britain can do anything about it. We are not voters in American elections, and our laws are not their laws. Their laws do seem bizarre. I'm not wholly unsympathetic to the Second Amendment, and like many of my fellow Britons, I can understand why an American would want to uphold the right to a handgun or a shotgun for self-defence or pest control, but I can't see any justification for laws in certain states that allow an 18-year-old to buy an assault rifle capable of discharging dozens of bullets in a matter of seconds. So mad some of America's rules may be, but they are not our rules, and while expressing fury at a young man nihilistically snuffing out so many lives is understandable, it changes nothing in America, actually. Well, I'm joined by the American author and Daily Wire podcast host, Andrew Klavan. Andrew, welcome to you. Another one of those terrible days in recent American history. You're in America. You are able to change laws there. We can't. Would you change anything?
I actually would not change anything about the gun laws. There are laws for security I would change. You have to explain this. I mean, I lived in England a long time, and I know that you have to explain the Second Amendment to people who don't live here. It's not incidental to our way of life. It is central to our way of life, not because we're cowboys, not because we're crazy people, but because we're a federation of states. We're the United States of America, and that system is meant to protect the liberty of the individual by bringing the government closer to him. You have to understand, Great Britain is the size of Minnesota in terms of land mass, in terms of population. It's the size of maybe 2 Californias. We're a huge country, and the people in Washington, D.C. don't know how the people in Arkansas live, and the people in California don't understand the way the people in Texas live. When the founders decreed that there should be a federal government, a federal army, a national armed forces, the United States Army, the states reasonably asked, well, what's to keep that army from conquering the states? And the answer was, well, we will let the people have guns so that you can form a militia to defend the individual states against the federal government. So that has nothing to do with flintlocks. It has nothing to do with the kinds of guns. It has to do with the rights of Americans to maintain their federation of states, Andrew, the same as the Electoral College.
But Andrew, but the types of guns matter. And I don't want to make this a sort of hideously technical thing. And I made clear in my introduction there, I'm not some sort of Guardian-reading anti-gun activist. I get the inherent logic of the Second Amendment. And I get that you might want a pistol for self-defence or a shotgun for pest control. I've shot shotguns for many years myself. I'm not unsympathetic to the idea. But an 18-year-old kid walking into a supermarket and pulling a semi-automatic off a shelf, that's different.
Yeah, I'm not sure you understand. The gun rights are not it's for pest control, and they're not for self-defense. They're for being able to form militias to fight the government if the government becomes tyrannical. As we see, the left hates everything that strengthens state rights, and that's what gun rights do. They hate gun rights because they strengthen state rights. They hate the Electoral College because they strengthen state rights. But state rights are a central defense of our form of liberty, which is bottom up, not top down. In your country, the sovereign is the queen. In our country, you're looking at the sovereign. The sovereign is the people, and it is the person, the individual. And so these gun rights are not there for the usual use of guns. They are there for the emergency situation in which the government becomes tyrannical. There are more guns owned in this country than there are people, and there's really no way to take them away. And you saw when, for instance, the Australians gave up their guns. When COVID came, they were locked into their homes like prisoners, like they did in China. That doesn't happen here for some degree because the government is afraid of us, as well they should be. So the answer here has got to be greater defense in schools. It's got to be greater, allowing people to patrol with arms. It's got to be good guys with guns facing down the bad guys with guns. It's the only system that's going to work here because of our unique system of government and the fact that gun rights are central to defending it. These stories are so heartbreaking and so emotional and so terrible. But you have to remember this. For the last 25 years, our crime rate has been exceptionally low. For a while, the murder rate in London was greater than the murder rate in New York. And during that period, there were no stronger gun restrictions than there are right now. These mass shootings are so dramatic and tragic and horrifying that they make you forget that for 25 years, this was a low crime country. It's only now that the left is in charge and becoming lenient with criminals that the crime rate has started to skyrocket once again. So it's not gun rights that cause crimes. It's actually intelligent, defending rights.
Andrew, we've got to leave it there, but it's important to give your side of the argument some airtime in a day when I suspect elsewhere it's probably not getting much. And it's a fascinating perspective you bring to us, an uncomfortable one as well. Andrew Clavin, appreciate it. Sarah Elliott's alongside me. I know there'll be viewers screaming at the telly saying, that guy's seriously saying the answer to 19 dead kids is to give a revolver to a teacher. Mm-hmm. Explain it.
I mean, it's not an ideal scenario. I don't like that scenario. But the culture and in which we live is pretty caustic. And just as Andrew said, we have more guns than we have citizens. So the genie's out of the bottle. You're not going to get all those guns back. And if you do, if the government does a gun buyback program, the criminals are the ones with the guns, and then the citizens, law-abiding citizens, have no way to defend themselves. But his argument's extremely important because this is what makes us different from Australia, from Canada, from the rest of the Commonwealth. We are United States, we have state laws. We also have very strict gun laws throughout the country. People think it's the Wild West everywhere you go, and it's not true. Our strictest gun laws are in our inner cities where we have the most shootings. And by the way, most of the shootings in America are done by handgun. Only 2 to 3% are AR-15, and they're not any more lethal than a handgun at short range.
Okay,
and so we have to look at the facts here. But one thing I do want to say on this topic is that every mass shooter of the last 25 years had a mental health problem.
I get that. I'm just not sure. On the automatic weapons thing, I'm not sure it's. This is grotesque, even talking about this. But it's not easy. It's harder for somebody to walk through a series of classrooms and gun down 19 kids with a pistol or a shotgun than it is an automatic rifle. Ergo, that's got to be true. Okay, I'm glad we got into it. Thank you. Time for 5 to 5. We're going to try and discuss 5 things you need to know before 5 o'clock. At 5, a week after receiving approval from the medical regulator, a new sight loss drug will be made available for hundreds of thousands of patients on the NHS. Researchers say the injection, which will be put into the eye, will drastically improve the vision of people who have certain degenerative eye conditions. Patient groups say the rollout will reduce the burden of arduous regular hospital visits. At 4, Nicola Sturgeon is now Scotland's longest-serving First Minister, having been in the top role for a total of 7 years, 6 months and 5 days. Our nation rejoices. She's surpassed her predecessor, Alex Salmond, who quit as First Minister in the wake of the September 2014 referendum, in which Scots voted against partition. At 3, the supermodel Kate Moss is giving evidence today in the libel lawsuit that the actor Johnny Depp has brought against his ex-wife Amber Heard. Speaking earlier, Kate Moss denied that she'd ever been pushed or assaulted by Depp during the course of their relationship. At 2, Dame Esther Ranson has called on ministers to stop elderly people being forced to pay to park their cars using an app. The broadcaster says some people are put off leaving their home because they're unable to use the technology. The 81-year-old has urged the government to introduce a minister for older people to deal with some of the problems they face. We'll be talking to Ros Altman, the former pensions minister, about that, I'm delighted to say, soon. And at 1, a stag party on the canal in Worcestershire turned to mayhem after the boats crashed and one partially sank after its occupants fell, quote, asleep. The report suggests the group hired 3 boats and set off along the waterways on Friday and stopped at the pub along the way. Events deteriorated and one boat was left stuck in a lock at a 45-degree angle, taking on water. They had to be rescued by the emergency services. Surrounding roads also flooded. A night to remember for some. Those are 5 things you might want to know about before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Let's just get the closing thoughts this hour of Sarah Elliott. We're looking forward, is that the right terminology, to 5 o'clock, the Prime Minister due to address the 1922 Backbench Committee. This matters because if it's that all round, he's gone. It almost certainly won't be, though, will it?
No, it doesn't look to be the case. We haven't had any cabinet ministers resign either. This seems like an old story. You know, it was January, February when it came out. It's a different world now. He's shown himself to be a leader on the world stage, and it looks like his underlings are going to take the hit for this.
Sarah, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we're going to bring you the rest of the day's news with Tamsin. Also, we're going to reflect on the Sue Gray report published today. How much does it matter to you? We'll talk to Tom Harwood and we'll get ready for the 1922 committee meeting. Stand by.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson set to address the 1922 committee of his own backbench MPs in the next few moments to address the release of the official version of social events inside Downing Street whilst the country was under coronavirus restrictions. Civil servant Sue Gray has published a report. She says many of the events should not have been allowed to happen. So will he face cheers or jeers? Also, the gun attack at a primary school in Texas, killing 19 children and 2 young adults. Former Chief of Staff to Joe Biden, Susan Platt, will have her say. And with me for the next 2 hours, spokeswoman for Republicans Overseas UK, that's Sarah Elliott. But first, the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. It's 5:01. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he feels overwhelmingly that he should remain in office, no matter how bitter and painful the conclusions of the Sue Gray report. The 37-page document, which contains photographs, highlights a number of events where many people gathered and alcohol was consumed excessively. It concludes that senior leadership must bear responsibility for this culture. Boris Johnson says he will keep moving forward and deliver on the priorities of the people.
When some of these officials and advisers were leaving their jobs, I briefly attended gatherings to thank them for everything they had done, because I believe that recognising achievement and preserving morale are essential duties of leadership. The police did not find my attendance at these occasions to be a breach of the rules, but they found otherwise in respect of some of those gatherings after I had left or when I was not in the building.
A snap poll by YouGov has found 59% of Brits surveyed think the Prime Minister should resign. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer told the Commons that the Sue Gray report laid bare the rot in Number 10. He called on MPs to tell Boris Johnson it's time to pack his bags.
It is that failure of leadership that has now left his government paralysed in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The government has turned the focus of his government to saving his own skin. It's utterly shameful.
Well, the Chancellor is expected to unveil a multi-billion-pound plan to help struggling families through the cost of living crisis. That's tomorrow. A new windfall tax on energy firms could be used to fund the package after Ofgem warned the energy price cap could rise by a further £830 in October. In other news now, a woman in Cumbria has been jailed for the murder of a one-year-old boy she was hoping to adopt. Laura Castle reported that Leyland James Corkhill was hurt after falling off a sofa, but hospital medics raised concerns about her claims. He died the following day from catastrophic head injuries. The 38-year-old will serve a minimum term of 18 years. A retired doctor who sexually assaulted his patients for over 3 decades has been jailed for 12 years. Krishna Singh was convicted of abusing 47 women from 1984 to 2018. The 72-year-old's victims include pregnant women, a rape survivor, and 4 girls under the age of 16. He's also been placed on the sex offenders register. The Foreign Secretary says the government wants to remove the customs bureaucracy from the Northern Ireland Protocol rather than scrap it completely. Speaking in Belfast, Liz Truss said the UK is open to talking with the European Union, but warned the issue can't be delayed any longer. She added that the UK has practical solutions to ease frictions to protect the single market and the Good Friday Agreement.
I think everybody in Northern Ireland recognises there are issues with the protocol that needs to be addressed. And my preference, as I've said, is to get a negotiated solution with the EU, but we simply can't allow this situation to drift.
In the US, the 19 children and 2 teachers killed by a teenage gunman in Texas were all shot while barricaded in a primary school classroom. The 18-year-old suspect, named as Salvador Ramos, allegedly shot his grandmother at home before heading to the elementary school. He was shot dead by an officer at the scene. President Joe Biden says Congress must pass new gun laws. Travellers can expect major disruption after the RMT union voted in favour of what it's calling the biggest rail strike in modern history. The union says rail firms have made millions during the pandemic and his members need a pay rise. The RMT has said strike dates will be discussed next week, but confirmed the strike won't take place over the Platinum Jubilee weekend.
Our members, some of them are now in the 3rd year of a pay freeze. Inflation, RPI is at 11.1% now, and this is the biggest cost of living crisis people are saying since records began, and they're feeling the pinch. They regard themselves as having worked extremely hard during the pandemic in difficult circumstances to keep the country moving, and they feel now that they're being betrayed.
Supermodel Kate Moss has told a court in America that Johnny Depp never pushed, kicked or threw her downstairs. She's testified at the actor's defamation trial against his ex-wife, Amber Heard. The model, who was in a relationship with Depp in the 90s, appeared via video link at the Fairfax courthouse in Virginia to speak about a holiday they'd taken together. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Colin.
Well, with apologies to all of you emailing in saying the whole lockdown thing, the Sue Gray report, is not news. We're going to carry on with it because we've arrived at a determination that it is. And today, Sue Gray's report on parties during lockdown has been released, and Boris Johnson is about to find out how his backbench MPs feel about it. The report, it included new photographs of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, suggests some of the gatherings in question represented a failure to observe not just the high standards expected of those working at the heart of government, but also the standards expected of the entire British population at the time. So said Sue Gray, who also went on to say that leadership at Downing Street must, quote, bear responsibility for this culture. She didn't pin the blame on named individuals. Boris Johnson says he takes full responsibility for everything that happened on his watch. Well, during PMQs, that was earlier today, the leader of the SNP at Westminster, Ian Blackford, said this.
Mr. Speaker, the reports that the Prime Minister and Downing Street's law-breaking have been damning. Empty bottles littering offices. Rooms so crowded, people were sitting on each other's laps, and security forced to intervene because the parties were so outrageous. At the centre was the Prime Minister orchestrating it, grabbing a glass for himself in order to toast the partygoers. The Prime Minister was engaging in drinking and debauchery that makes a mockery of the gut-wrenching sacrifices that each and every person made.
The former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik is alongside me. Ian Blackford never wastes his moment in the sun. Debauchery? I mean, it wasn't some sort of Roman orgy, for heaven's sake.
I'm sure he used that word so that we would discuss it.
I think you're right.
Technically, it's the right word. But as somebody who's been on the wrong end of the media before, I don't think it's libelous, but everybody knows why Ian Blackford used it. What's really interesting, of course, is he was the official opposition today because Keir Starmer is completely hamstrung because he can't really criticise Boris Johnson for something he's done himself. And just let's remember, the only reason Boris Johnson, in my opinion, is still there is because Keir Starmer's done a pathetic job of opposition and has now been exposed as having done the same thing.
We'll come on to the big politics in a second.
Okay.
Just on the specifics, Ian Blackford there talked about raising a glass. Prime Minister, when he addressed journalists from Downing Street earlier, said, look, part of, and this seemed to be a newish line, part of being a leader is when people leave your service, you say thank you.
Well, that's okay then. Then every party, by everybody, in every family in the country means that perhaps the father or the mother or the daughter or the sister was showing leadership. It's a preposterous defence. I was in Parliament for 13 years, and had I been an MP at the time, lots of parties going on, lots of socialisation, but I wouldn't have thought at any point that the rules didn't apply to me, that I could have 10 people in my room with bottles when expressly, certainly within 7 days either way, the Prime Minister himself was telling other people not to do it. Now, he can make these technical arguments against it. How many people watching really believe it? Now, a lot of people don't care. That's true. You've just made that point at the beginning. But a lot of people do. My mother died in July last year. She didn't die of COVID, but I didn't see her for a year and a half because I was observing these rules, and he wasn't.
Were the rules themselves at fault?
Yes, they were preposterous rules again, but he made them up. He was in charge. You can't now say, well, those rules didn't really count. If somebody else, if a former Prime Minister had just come in at that point, then maybe he had a defence. But he's the man who made his Churchillian speech, which at the time I was quite impressed with, saying things are going to be different. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be tough. And what people don't like is the nasty party attitude that they got away from. Now, I'm not involved in party politics. I'm not trying to score a point against the Conservatives. What I'm interested in here, though, is the fact that Boris Johnson has broken so many etiquettes, so many rules, that would have had another Prime Minister out, and he's still floating.
There's a definite strain amongst our emails today saying, do you know how this looks from the outside? It looks petty and punctilious, and I know, and I don't want you to recite endlessly. I know it's necessary, and every politician who comes on says, "Well, I lost," you know, and we get all that. We've all got stories about that. We all tried our best, and a lot of us actually didn't observe the rules. But from the outside, Britain looks strangely punctilious. There's a bit of me that likes that. I like the fact we're just so wedded to the rules that our bar for wrongdoing is so low. That's rather brilliant. But I think it looks really odd from the outside.
To me, two very psychologically important things are coming out of this, and you've implied that. Number one, a lot of people, the ones who don't care, the ones who are complaining about GBNews talking about this and other media outlets talking about it and saying, we all know what Boris is like. This is what Boris does. This is why we voted for him, because we want to go for a pint with him and he'd be a laugh in the local pub. And so that protects him. The second point here is that there is so much contradiction in the Labour Party not being able to rise above this because of the comments that have been made by Starmer and others, that the public going, oh, this is actually getting a bit boring now. Now, technically, I'm pretty sure that it's hard to believe Boris didn't spot a party when there were bottles everywhere, red wine stains and everything else. But the public are saying now, we've had enough of this. So he could get away with it. But the problem is, the big question, I was speaking to some very senior Tories 2 days ago, and they said, he can get away with this, but if he doesn't bring the party polls around in the next 6 months, then he's a goner anyway. They all only care, they're a brilliant survival machine. They only care about having the chief stag in an advantageous position. And it doesn't matter whether he gets away with it now or not. If the public turn against him, he's out. If the public turn for him, he's in.
Limit Opic, always good of you to drop by. That really appreciate it. And Sarah Elliott's going to have a two-penneth on that one very shortly. But first, let's just turn to the former newspaper editor and media consultant, Neil Wallace, who joins me now. Neil, welcome to you. By my reckoning, 12 minutes into the 1922 Backbench Committee at Westminster, will they be thumping the tables or, you know, quietly suggesting the Prime Minister needs to look very hard at those polls that Limit Opic was just talking about?
I'm not sure they'll be doing either. I suspect that they are all desperate for this to go away. And I understand why they're desperate to get for it to go away, because an awful lot of your viewers are as well. It is right that this has been exposed. I personally thought I was appalled by Partygate, but the moment has kind of passed. I think it will have damaged Boris Johnson. I think it will have damaged the Conservative Party. I'm not sure that it's going to benefit the Labour Party. And it is sort of fizzling out, but it will leave a scar.
Neil, Carol emails to say there's a disconnect between what the media thinks and the majority of Joe public. What a pack of wolves this is Carol's view, the mainly left-wing media are. Leave the PM alone to get on with the real issues, please. That's Carol's view. There's another view from James Kirkup on the Spectator website right now, talking about today being what he describes as a helicopter day, the day that the big news channels put up the chopper with the cameras and film the Prime Minister and his cavalcade travelling from Downing Street to Parliament. They've decided it's a really important punctuation mark in the life of the nation, but not everybody does.
Well, this is very interesting. I just a few moments ago tweeted about the fact that I really didn't like the press conference that I watched. I think it's absolutely right that the British press still believe it to be the greatest press in the world, still believe that the freedom of the press is absolutely paramount for us all. But the sort of open contempt that frankly, particularly television media, show for the office of Prime Minister. They can disagree with him. They can hold his feet to the fire. They can demand that he answers their questions. But what I don't like is this sort of almost contempt that they're showing for him. They don't have to like him. It's not their business. You know, yes, they are there to get to the truth, but do it with some dignity and with some respect. This is still our Prime Minister. If he gets kicked out, he gets kicked out. But I think there is, yet again, you are seeing a disconnect between what what you call it's a terrible tag, but the mainstream media, but particularly the big TV channels, you know, Sky, had a man yesterday, Sam Coates, I think he's called, standing outside Downing Street, effectively screaming insults at the cabinet. You know, this isn't going to get us anywhere. No one's going to turn around and say, yes, you completely
I used to
right.
work with Sam, and we'll do him the courtesy of not being here to answer that charge, but I've seen that clip online as well, and many people will have done. They'll draw their own conclusions. Neil, really good to talk to you as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Sarah Elliott's alongside me to reflect on that. Heavens above, I mean, you're from a country where the office of the senior politician in the land is venerated to a degree that we don't really relate to.
Yes, they get presidential libraries, which are like these eternal, you know, eternal flames of fire for them that never go out. And yeah, privately funded, by the way. But yes, no, I agree. Listen, I loved your point about rules, about how the English are so rule-focused.
British.
And the British, sorry, the British, of course. And it's true. And actually, as an American, I get kind of fed up with it at times, you know, because you are very much about, oh, it has to be the rule, whereas I'm more about the spirit of the rule rather than the letter of the law.
Yeah. You're French at heart.
Perhaps I do enjoy France, but like the queuing, you have this rule where you can't hold a spot in the queue for your friend at Starbucks, or you'll get yelled at by the person behind you.
We're digressing, and we haven't got time to digress today, fun though it might be. Sarah Fano, thanks very much indeed. Let's turn to the public law barrister, Francis Hoare, for a legal perspective on this. Francis, welcome to you. Legally, in terms of what the Prime Minister's done, he's got a fixed penalty notice for one breach of, well, I was going to say breach of the law, but you've explained to us before that fixed penalty notices are sort of offered to people, aren't they?
Yes, so it's the opinion of a police officer that he has breached the law. He has the opportunity to accept that. I understand that he has accepted that in that instance. That was a few weeks ago. And that means that he is recorded as having accepted a fixed penalty notice. He's recorded as having accepted that he breached the law. He had the opportunity, but didn't take it, to require the police and or the Crown Prosecution Service to prosecute him, and for him to set out his defence that he didn't breach the law, but he didn't take that opportunity.
Francis, in terms of the involvement of lawyers in all this, as we're speaking, we've got the 1922 Committee of Backbench Conservative MPs meeting in the Palace of Westminster now. They are making a political calculation about the Prime Minister's future, but also about his personal probity. The law doesn't come into this, does it?
No, it doesn't. An important consideration for them will be whether or not the Prime Minister misled the House of Commons. And that is very much a question only for the House of Commons. It's fiercely guarded, has been for hundreds of years, but put into statutory forms in 1689 with Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, which provides that Parliament has immunity from any form of questioning by the courts. And that's the origin of the prohibition on being able to sue an MP for what he or she says in the House of Commons. That also means that the question of whether or not an MP has misled the House, which is, of course, a serious matter, is a matter for the House of Commons alone.
It's worth reflecting, and indeed our reporter in the Prime Minister's press conference earlier raised the question of whether in all this we lose sight sometimes of the fact that I know you've written and said a lot, Francis, over the last couple of years about this, whether the rules themselves were at times so ambiguous and bewildering that actually what Partygate serves to underline more than anything else is just how absurd and impractical they were.
Yes, and I've just been reading the report of Sue Gray. I'm afraid I haven't had an opportunity to read the whole lot because I've been in and out of court hearings and conferences all day. But it's what is striking is, frankly, the triviality of what is said. I note at paragraph 28, Ms Gray said that these people were putting their health and the health of others at risk. They clearly didn't think so. And they were right not to think so, because there's absolutely no evidence that these particular measures made any difference whatsoever to the pandemic, which followed the usual course of epidemiological course of a pandemic. But that's only one question. That's the question of science. But the question of civil liberties and the question of whether or not it was ever appropriate to leapfrog the country into these sorts of regulations using powers never before used for that purpose, never envisaged it, never before has it been suggested that the Public Health Act 1984, as amended in 2008, could have authorised these sorts of measures passed by a government minister and not even debated by the House of Commons. So yes, I have commented that the really important question for this country is why that happened, whether it was justified, and why questions were not asked. So, first of all, why the government did that, passed these laws, didn't, it seems very clear, didn't consider in detail or at all the wider implications and wider costs of it to the whole country, notwithstanding that they had been well documented in all the extensive pandemic planning the government had done, despite its claims to the contrary. And secondly, so government bears primary responsibility. Secondly, though, the leader of the opposition and the opposition generally failed to ask any of these questions and failed to put the government to account, hold the government rather to account, both for its legislation and for its governance. Those are the two central responsibilities and duties of the opposition, and they failed.
Francis Hoare, and you never failed to point that out, and for which we're grateful. Thanks very much indeed. Sarah Elliott's alongside me to reflect on, well, any part of that. There's a lot that Francis unpacks.
Yes, but I think we do need to think about these lockdowns and look at the cost-benefit analysis and what we've sacrificed for, and was it really necessary or not? And again, we also have to look at the travel restrictions and masking and all of that. And we can't just move on to the war in Ukraine. We really have to go back and have a serious conversation as a country, especially the use of emergency powers by Parliament.
Just an email from a viewer. We were talking about the NHS, and I think Stephen Pound, the Labour MP, was saying, you know, NHS nurses, they weren't having parties. You suggested that actually 1.3 million employees, it's hard to know what everybody was doing. Anne says, in my workplace, the NHS, we were expressly forbidden to bring in any cakes from home for our colleagues' consumption, and definitely no takeaways, McDonald's or pizza, let alone booze, says Anne. Coming up, we're going to be spending a bit more time talking about this, whether you like it or not. Also, the Labour MP for Brent North, Barry Gardner, will join us with his thoughts. First, we've got the weather for you.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a cool and cloudy day so far, and we keep a keen breeze during the rest of the day with further showers, but there will be some brighter spells making an appearance later, particularly towards the northwest as a weather front drifts through. And the isobars at the moment fairly tightly packed and seasonably breezy for May, and that's making it feel cool out there. But at least the more persistent rain eases during the rest of the day. The cloud breaks up. Clear spells as we go through the first part of the night, particularly towards Scotland, northern and eastern England, eastern parts of Wales as well. However, by the end of the night, well, further rain arrives into Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. 9 to 11 Celsius here, 12 in the south, 7 or 8 for northern Scotland, where we keep showers going through much of the night, along with a blustery breeze. But it's a damp start for Northern Ireland, for southern and central Scotland, and then the rain sinks into northern England, North Wales, where it will be heavy at times. Eventually, this feature weakens, so it's light and patchy rain for many by the end of the afternoon. And really, it's affecting central parts, drier and brighter to the south, 22 Celsius in London, and staying windy in the north, Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing bright spells and showers north of the central belt, where, well, the winds will be reaching gale force around exposed coasts. The showers keep going through Thursday night in the north of Scotland, 1 or 2 drifting further south. But for the rest of the UK, clear spells fairly extensively. And as a result, temperatures in places dipping into the single figures. But the far south stays mild because of a bit more cloud here. The cloud at least slower to clear, but widespread sunshine actually on Friday morning. Cloudier skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Still windy here with further showers in the far north. But even those showers ease away on Saturday as high pressure builds from the south. We're going to see sunny spells for most, and it's going to feel warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Other people are reporting the reaction of Conservative MPs in that 1922 backbench committee meeting. Appreciation or not to the Prime Minister. So we've got our own sources. We'll let you know what the vibe is in that meeting. In the meantime, let's keep on reflecting on the Sue Gray report into Downing Street parties during lockdown. The PM says he's humbled, has learned lessons following its publication. It's a 37-page long document. It contains photographs. There's one. Apologies if you're listening on the radio. It highlights a number of events where alcohol was consumed excessively until the early hours of the morning. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is currently facing his own Conservative MPs, as I say, at the 1922 committee. We're joined by the Labour MP for Brent North, Barry Gardner now. Barry Gardner, welcome to you. Your reaction to the Sue Gray report today?
Look, I think after, 5 months of Partygate, I think there are very few people in the country who have not already made up their mind one way or the other about what they think of the Prime Minister. For most people, the Sue Gray report will have confirmed that Boris Johnson lied to Parliament about the parties, that he did in fact break not just the law, as the police found, but that he presided over a culture of disregard for the rules that he had set, and that it was one rule for the population and another for him and his cronies. So, but there will be other people who simply say, no, we must move on. The important thing now is to deal with the cost of living crisis and Ukraine. And they will want to take the focus away from the Prime Minister because they support him and they support his policies. So I'm not honestly convinced that the Sue Gray report will make a huge difference to the political views of anybody who reads it. It may substantiate a few facts. Certainly the photographs that are contained in the report are to some people shocking. But in terms of what it's going to do in the wider country and moving public opinion, I think people really are suffering so much now from the cost of living crisis and their energy bills that the focus will rapidly shift there.
And just in terms of Labour Party tactics on that, and this is a conversation I'm sure you're part of on the backbenches, we had reports a couple of weeks ago that someone like Nisa Nandi was saying to Keir Starmer, look, stop banging on about Partygate, start banging on about the cost of living crisis, that's what matters more. So this isn't abstract. I mean, this is a serious calculation for the opposition to make.
No, look, I think, very often things like this can be considered to be tactics and strategy. it's actually members of Parliament responding to the worries of their constituents. Now, I have people writing to me at the moment who are in dire financial circumstances, who have huge problems because of the cost of living crisis, and I know that that's what is worrying them. I have others, of course, who are outraged by the fact that they believe we have a Prime Minister who has lied, who's broken the ministerial code, and who appears to preside over a government which feels it's above the rest of the population and holds people in contempt. So we're trying to respond to both, I think, and every MP will be doing that in their own way. But I think we have to be realistic that it's 5 months on now. There hasn't been a great deal new in the Sue Gray report, apart from her saying that the Prime Minister presided over this wanton culture, these Wine Time Fridays, the WTFs. And, most people, I think, will look at that and they will do the WTF in the other meaning of it, and just hold their hands up in disbelief.
Yeah. What other possible meaning can there be? That's a topic for another time. Barry Gardiner, we're talking about probity in politics. I promised to only do this once, but this is the first opportunity I've had to talk to you since the story emerged that your office had accepted £500,000 in Chinese donations, which had a smell attached to them. I think it's a legitimate question. What is your answer?
No, actually, well, yeah. Well, you know what my answer is. I went on the 6 o'clock news on ITV. I did a 20-minute interview. I answered every question that John Craig put to me live on air. I then went on the Indale programme on LBC. I did a half-hour interview with him, and I then opened myself up to members of the public to ask whatever questions they wanted on a phone-in. I've been totally transparent at all points. I've got nothing to hide. And actually, all of the donations, which not a penny came to me, of course, as you well know, those donations were paid directly to people to work in my office, and it was I who appointed them and managed them, and the donor had nothing to do with the management or the appointment of those people. So, even the security services were good enough to say to me that they had no information that suggested that any of the donations that came into my office were in any way tainted. They were clear about that. I asked them that specific question. And so I'm very happy to answer your question and clear it up. But, I think if we're trying to look at what's wrong with politics today, deflection techniques that you've just deployed, in order to deflect attention from what the Prime Minister has faced. Yeah.
No, I don't think I've not had the chance. You were the subject of a major story a few months ago. This is the first opportunity I've had to put it to you.
And as you know,
I've put it to you, and I even mentioned it as an introduction to the question. It's the one and only time, and I'll mention it to you. I've mentioned it to you. You've made it very clear what your answer is, and we thank you for it. Barry Gardiner, the MP for Brent North. Thanks a lot. You're coming up. What's coming up? Let's tell you. More reaction to the full Sue Gray report into Downing Street parties during lockdown. Also some reaction to that dreadful mass shooting in Texas. A gunman killing 19 children and 2 adults at a primary school. We'll discuss gun control in the United States. First, the latest news headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. It's 5:34. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says he feels overwhelmingly that he should remain in office, no matter how bitter and painful the conclusions of the Sue Gray report. The 37-page document, which contains photos, highlights a number of events where many people gathered and alcohol was consumed excessively. It concludes that senior leadership must bear responsibility for this culture. Boris Johnson says he will keep moving forward and deliver on the priorities for the people.
When some of these officials and advisors were leaving their jobs, I briefly attended gatherings to thank them for everything they had done, because I believe that recognising achievement and preserving morale are essential duties of leadership. The police did not find my attendance at these occasions to be a breach of the rules, but they found otherwise in respect of some of those gatherings after I had left or when I was not in the building.
Well, a snap poll by YouGov has found 59% of Brits think the Prime Minister should resign. A woman in Cumbria has been jailed for the murder of a one-year-old boy she was hoping to adopt. According to Laura Castle, Leyland James Corkhill was hurt after falling off a sofa, but hospital medics raised concerns about her claims. He died from catastrophic head injuries the following day. The 38-year-old will serve a minimum term of 18 years. In the US, the 19 children and 2 teachers killed by a teenage gunman in Texas were all shot while barricaded in a primary school classroom. The 18-year-old suspect, named as Salvador Ramos, allegedly shot his grandmother at home before heading to the school. He was shot dead by an officer at the scene. Nicola Sturgeon has become Scotland's longest-serving First Minister. Miss Sturgeon, the first woman in Bute House, has been in power since 2014. She replaced Alex Salmond, who quit in the wake of the independence referendum after serving for 7 years. Supermodel Kate Moss has told a court in America that Johnny Depp never pushed, kicked or threw her downstairs. She's testified at the actor's defamation trial against his ex-wife Amber Heard. The model, who was in a relationship with Depp in the 90s, appeared via video link at the Fairfax courthouse in Virginia to speak about a holiday they'd taken together. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. It's back to Colin in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.254 to the dollar and the pound is 1.182 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at 1,471.79 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, we'll take you abroad. At least 19 children and 2 teachers have been killed by teenage gunmen. This was in Texas. The 18-year-old suspect opened fire at a primary school in Uvalde. He was shot dead by an officer at the scene. The authorities locally believe that he was acting alone, with a motive as yet unclear. President Biden has ordered flags to fly at half-mast until sunset on Saturday and says Congress must now introduce new gun control laws. Let's turn to a former...
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done? 10 years since I stood up at a high school in Connecticut, a grade school in Connecticut, where another gunman massacred 26 people, including 20 first graders at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Since then, there have been over 900 incidents.
Well, let's turn to a former Chief of Staff to Joe Biden, that is Susan Platt. Susan Platt, welcome to you. A dreadful day, this.
It's a horrible day, and we're looking now at 24 hours since this happened, and we're all asking the same question. How can we keep letting this happen? What is it we can do? I have a granddaughter who's 5 years old. I fear the dangers that she deals with every day are not dangers that I dealt with. And I'll tell you, there are things we can do, and President Biden is correct. But the problem that we have right now in this country is there are over 330 million people and over 400 million guns. And what this is about is political hypocrisy and cowardice that's prevented action, and the cowardice on behalf of the gun lobby and those who support them.
And when you have that level of saturation of firearms, you have to accept to some degree that you can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Absolutely, that's correct. But what you can do is you can go back to an assault weapon ban and a ban on these large capacity magazines, which would help prevent not every shooting. I heard a statistic today that over 109 people are shot and killed every day in the United States. Some of that is in mass killings. We just had one last week, 10 people in Buffalo, New York. It's got to stop, and someone has to get a backbone. And what happens there, they're just afraid of losing their seats. How do you explain to, I will just say this, if I were a politician, an elected official, and my granddaughter came to me and said, Grandma, why does this keep happening? Why can't you do something to stop it? And I have to answer the question saying, because I'm afraid I'm going to lose an election? That's very, very wrong.
Susan Platt, I was struck today, and not for the first time, by listening to phone-in programmes and British listeners shouting at radio hosts, almost as if they were constituents in an American election. They're not, they're 5,000 miles away. So there is this sort of, it provokes this huge international reaction, but actually, at the end of the day, people here can be angry about it, but on one level, it's nothing to do with them.
Well, I tell you, people here are angry about it. If you look at the polling questions, 80 to 90% believe we should have stronger background checks. 80 to 90% believe we should have assault weapon ban and limited capacity on these large magazines. But we have politicians who are more concerned about the gun lobby and the NRA than they are about our children. And that's about as crass as you can get.
I tell you, this crass is a strong word on one level, Susan Platt. Let me just introduce to our viewers Sarah Elliott, who speaks for Republicans overseas. She's my studio guest today. Can you counter any of that, Sarah?
Well, Susan, my question to you is, and trust me, I side with you being horrified by this event and by the gun crimes in our country. But, you know, you want an assault weapons ban, but they're only responsible for 2 to 3% of all gun shootings in America, when most are suicide with handguns. About 54%, 24,000 suicides are done by shooting themselves with a handgun. So how will that assault weapons ban help with gun crime?
Well, I'm sorry, but some of that is a deflection. We wouldn't have 19 children dead today. We wouldn't have 19 dead children if we had an assault weapons ban. If we had background checks, here's this young man who was 18. If we increased the age to a federal age to 21 to buy a gun, he wouldn't be able to buy the gun.
Would you agree with me that most of these mass shootings, and it is on record that these mass shooters have had some form of mental health or mental illness, and it is known to authorities and to local people that this young man had mental health problems. should we not impose more of a mental health red flag law other than banning assault weapons?
I agree. We need to do all of the above. We need to increase the red flag law. We need to increase the age for purchase, which would be to 21 as opposed to 18. We need to ban assault weapons. Who needs an assault weapon to go hunting with a deer? Nobody does. And we need to decrease these large capacity magazines. You know, the police were there to try to stop this man. They were outgunned. When the shooter has bigger and more capacity guns than the cops, you got a problem.
I think it was that he was wearing body armor and they couldn't take him down as easily. But I do find that a poor excuse from our law enforcement.
Well, he was
I'm also concerned, Susan.
Shooting guns.
I appreciate your advocacy for gun restrictions and gun laws. I understand where your passion is coming from. But as somebody who defends the Second Amendment, I am confused as to why there's so much high gun crime in democratically run cities for the past 50 years. They have the strictest gun laws in the nation, and yet there have been close to 300 shootings and murders in Chicago alone this year. There are 3,500 gun incidents in Chicago last year alone. I mean, I don't think that's the answer. The proof is in the pudding, but can you explain it to me?
It's called deflection once again. You just had 19 children and 2 teachers killed in Texas, which has changed our gun laws.
What about the children in Chicago?
Sarah Elliott, let Susan finish.
Excuse me. Governor Abbott just lamented the fact that they only sold 1 million guns in Texas last year. Only sold 1 million guns. There's something wrong with that culture.
Susan Platt, we have to leave it there. We appreciate you debating that with Sarah Elliott. Thanks for your candour. Thanks very much indeed to Sarah.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to move on from car parking to banking and GP visits. We must stop punishing the elderly for the crime of not being able to install or operate an app. So says my next guest. Baroness Altman, the former pensions minister, has taken up the story of 84-year-old Chris Perfides, who arrived at a friend's memorial service only to discover he could only leave his car if he paid by app or used an automated payment line. Unable to get to grips with either, he left his car and, of course, received inevitably a parking fine. His son left to sort out that fine following his father's death. Well, we're joined by Baroness Altman now. Ros Altman, appreciate your time.
Sure, good afternoon.
This is a growing problem.
It certainly is. I mean, increasingly, companies and even public bodies seem to be expecting everybody across the country to be able to engage digitally with the services that they might really need for their everyday lives. And it's simply not the case that everybody can manage. You know, there will be millions of people who will be digitally disadvantaged by this. And it is a form of disguised discrimination, because if you are elderly, if you are disabled, it's much, much harder for you to actually engage with apps. If you can't afford a smartphone or you've never used one and you just need to talk to somebody or use a machine that you can put cash in, it's not able to pay.
They're fiddly. I mean, if you're 80-something and your dexterity isn't what it was, I mean, just physically using it becomes difficult.
Well, it could be certainly very difficult. And the other problem is that if you have any issues with it, there's nothing you can do. You can't phone anybody. You can't call anyone to help you. There's no alternative if the app isn't working or if the payment system isn't working either. But if you can't use it in the first place, you know, there are elderly people who are telling me they used to be able to go to the park, but they need to park their car in a car park to be able to use the facilities. And they can't park their car if they haven't got a smartphone. I mean, that's ridiculous. There isn't a cash option. Or even in hospital car parks, sometimes people are finding that they can't manage. And this, you know, poor Chris Perfides, you know, you go to a memorial service and he'd been to this place before and suddenly they put in a new parking system which locked him out of being able to pay to park. So I think there needs to be some legislation that says if there is no alternative system for those people who aren't digitally enabled, then you shouldn't be allowed to force them to pay a fine for using that service. Because this is all, let's face it, this is about profit and cutting costs and benefiting shareholders. But what about the customers?
Well, just to be clear, I mean, sometimes these are public institutions as well as private ones that are doing this. But you're right, the motive's the same, to cut down on the cost of dealing with cash. Ros Altman, we've got to leave it there, but really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. I ought to say, we all know 80-somethings who are perfectly capable and very happy to use iPhones, but you know what I mean. Ricky Gervais's new Netflix show has been accused of humiliating trans people. The comedian and star of The Office focuses on cancel culture and woke comedy in his one-off special, Supernature. The American LGBT rights group GLAAD labelled the show dangerous and anti-trans after its release yesterday. Does comedy like this cross a line of decency, or is Gervais doing what we should expect from our braver, richer and therefore less cancelable comics? We're joined by the comedian Leo Kearse. Leo, welcome to you. I've seen it online. We can't repeat it on the telly and radio because there are nasty swear words. I found it very funny, and I found it quite insightful.
Yeah, I found it funny as well. I wasn't really expecting to find it as funny as it did. I thought, because I'd heard from other people, other comedians, that it was hack, that it took an easy route through the material, was very obvious jokes. But I didn't think it was at all. I mean, it was obvious in that it's just an obvious truth that he's referencing, that some trans people. I mean, I think we're all aware that there's genuine trans people who put the effort in and look like the person and can pass and should absolutely be respected. Then there's also just big hulking blokes with beards who are like, oh, I don't subscribe to patriarchal heteronormative beauty norms, so I've got a beard and let me in that toilet. I need to go for a poo. And that is not I think we need to sort of delineate when people say Gervais is being transphobic. He's not being transphobic against genuine transgender people. He's just posing the question, the obvious question. Are these other people, the ones with the beards, the ones who haven't made any effort, who are just subverting the sort of rules that have been laid, by saying that I'm a woman under the new rules, under woke rules, just changing your pronouns, it doesn't really make you a woman.
And Leo, on one level, the best barometer of whether it worked or not was the audience's reaction, and they were rolling around.
Absolutely. I mean, comedy is a very honest. This is why comedy is so dangerous to people, because it exposes lies, and it's a very honest medium. You can't. Laughter is an involuntary response. You can't plan to laugh. Clapping or applause, which you get with a lot of woke comedians, that's something you can consciously decide to do. So you can
never realised that before, Leo. Actually, that's really interesting. That if the woke comedian, the audience tends to sort of preconceive their reception and clap. We're out of time. I'm so sorry, Leo, but we appreciate you talking about that. It's an important story. Thanks a lot. Michelle Dewberry has some important news coming up for the next hour or so. She's here to tell you about what's in the show today. Michelle.
Hello, Colin. Well, yes, if my viewers are desperate to hear every single twist and turn about Partygate, I've got to make a confession. The next show is not going to be for you because, quite frankly, I think most of it are bored to tears with it all by now. I certainly am. But I want to talk about, 10 years today since Theresa May, the then Home Secretary, said that she wants Britain to be a hostile environment for immigration. We'll be looking at what's gone on in the last 10 years. Was it the right thing to say, the wrong thing to say, and where are we with it all? Also, this is a bit of a weird one. In California, Colin, they're in the process of trying to make parents able to sue social media companies if their children become addicted to the platforms. Very peculiar, because if you ask me, it's the parents' responsibility to stop kids being addicted to social media in the first place. But I guess where there's blame, there's a claim. You can get up to $25,000 if you were to be successful, Colin, with that.
I'm on to TikTok straight away. That sounds like a nice little learner. Michelle, thanks very much indeed. Michelle's coming up very soon. The 1922 committee, it's still meeting. We can report that there's been banging of tables in support of Boris Johnson. Let's just turn finally for a brief thought from Sarah Elliott's been my guest throughout today's show, and thank you for it. Boris Johnson survives. Michelle thinks it's all a storm in a teacup. What say you?
I agree. And tomorrow it's all about cost of living, what the energy companies are going to do for us, and we're back to normal life.
I'm just hearing in my ear, it's been reported to me from that meeting that the Prime Minister has said he's apologised again to his own MPs and he's working hard on regaining public trust. How long do we have left? 20 seconds. I'll tell you again that Michelle Dewberry is coming up, and I've got time for one email. There's always time for an email. Yes, here it comes. Anne says, no, we've read Anne's already, and Linda's too. Another viewer wrote, it's obvious. Boris broke all the rules, but there is nobody to replace him. Is that what they're considering now at the 1922 committee? Stand by. Michelle's next.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a cool and cloudy day so far, and we keep a keen breeze during the rest of the day with further showers, but there will be some brighter spells making an appearance later, particularly towards the northwest as a weather front drifts through. And the isobars at the moment fairly tightly packed and seasonably breezy for May, and that's making it feel cool out there. But at least the more persistent rain eases during the rest of the day. The cloud breaks up. Clear spells as we go through the first part of the night, particularly towards Scotland, northern and eastern England, eastern parts of Wales as well. However, by the end of the night, well, further rain arrives into Northern Ireland and southwest Scotland. 9 to 11 Celsius here, 12 in the south, 7 or 8 for northern Scotland, where we keep showers going through much of the night, along with a blustery breeze. But it's a damp start for Northern Ireland, for southern and central Scotland, and then the rain sinks into northern England, North Wales, where it will be heavy at times. Eventually, this feature weakens, so it's light and patchy rain for many by the end of the afternoon, and really it's affecting central parts. Drier and brighter to the south, 22 Celsius in London, and staying windy in the north. Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing bright spells and showers north of the central belt, where, well, the winds will be reaching gale force around exposed coasts. The showers keep going through Thursday night in the north of Scotland, 1 or 2 drifting further south. But for the rest of the UK, clear spells fairly extensively. And as a result, temperatures in places dipping into the single figures. But the far south stays mild because of a bit more cloud here. The cloud at least slower to clear, but widespread sunshine actually on Friday morning. Cloudier skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Still windy here with further showers in the far north. But even those showers ease away on Saturday as high pressure builds from the south. We're going to see sunny spells for most, and it's going to feel warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all